On today's show, I'm breaking down Marcus Semien's season, the highs, the lows, how he fell short of expectations or exceeded some, and what that means for next year. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 11th. As I'm recording this, the NLDS and soon the ALDS will be underway. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Now, this week, we are getting into some player reviews, just looking overall at their seasons. I'm starting with Marcus Semien because he is the Baseball Reference WAR leader for this team. I think he's the Fangraphs WAR leader as well, but honestly, at the end of the day, I feel like position player-wise, he is the one who was the most consistent offensively and defensively. If we're just going offensive, obviously Nathaniel Lowe was the hitter of the season. If I wanted to go with pitching, start with Martin Perez. We'll get to him later on in the week, and Seager and Lowe as well, I think, all this week. But I wanted to start with Marcus Semien because he had probably the most extreme season outside of maybe Jonah Heim. But I think Semien's highs were just a little bit more high, and the lows were definitely a whole lot lower. We're going to start with what he did well, what needs room for improvement, and just finish with some overall takeaways on his season. Let's start with the good. If you want to start with the good, you gotta wait a little bit. You gotta skip ahead a little bit and go to the second half of the season, because that is where Marcus Semien really looked like himself. Not for the entirety of that second half. He did have a little bit of a wonky month of August, but basically from June until the end of the season, it was like, okay, this is the Marcus Semien that the Rangers spent a lot of money on. This is the guy who they thought, okay, this is the one that's going to change everything. He was the first signing. I believe he was right before John Gray. And then literally like a day later was when Corey Seager was signed. And Corey Seager would not be coming to Texas, would not be in Texas, if not for Marcus Semien. So he was kind of the domino that pushed everything down in that second half. Well, let's start with his overall numbers on the season. He finishes the year with a 248 batting average, on base of 304, slugged 429, a 733 OPS in 161 games, 724 plate appearances, and 657 at-bats. He had 5 triples, 26 homers, 83 ribbies, 25 stolen bases, which was a career high, and 31 doubles. Finished the year with a 5.7 baseball reference WAR, which is second among all shortstop or all second basemen in the American League, and led this team. Overall, B- season, I'd say. Maybe C+. I mean, the highs were really high, but the lows were so low. But those highs were great. In the second half, basically, once he hit that first home run in May, it was kind of game on from that point to the end of the season. The second half, he had 72 games under his belt, a 777 OPS. You know, if he was a betting man, maybe he should go take those numbers to the lottery, versus the first half, where his OPS was 80 points lower than that. The batting average jumped up 20 points. The on-base jumped up 15. The slugging jumped up 65 points. He only had 72 games in the second half versus 89 in the first, but he had the exact same number of home runs in each. He even had more triples and more doubles in that second half, and 10 fewer strikeouts. Not quite as many walks, but again, we're talking about the sample size, so the walk rate was higher, even though the actual total number wasn't quite as good. And I kept a very close eye on his baseball savant numbers all season, and at the very beginning, they were in such a deep hole in terms of like average exit velo, WOBA, barrel percentage, expected expected everything, hard hit percentage. All of those were just way in the bottom, like bottom 5% for those first 2 months of the season. He was in just an absolute hell the first 2 months of that season. He kind of pulled things out just a little bit, but some of the things that he really did well throughout the season is even when he was in the doldrums of the worst slump of his career, I'd say, he was not expanding the strike. He was not striking out a whole lot. He finished the year in the 79th percentile strikeout percentage. So basically top quarter of the league in not striking out. Same with the whiff percentage and the chase rate, sprint speed, and the 11th highest percentile, the 89th percentile, whatever, on sprint speed, and outs above average defensively, 95th percentile. The defense was great all year. He would have told you, and he talked about it at the end of the year, that he wasn't satisfied with what his defense was. And granted, this still is only his second year as a primary second baseman, and still in a defensive infield that, to put it mildly, is not good. He is by far the best defensive player in that infield. Everything felt like it was struggling at the beginning of the year, and those offensive struggles led into defensive struggles, and everything just kind of spiraled from there. But he was able to pull out the defense and pull that up to snuff faster than he did the other parts of his game. It did take a little while to get those things going, but the defense was definitely there, and he was right up there in a lot of the American League leaderboards. Let's look at position player baseball reference war. He was 7th in the American League, tied with Xander Bogaerts, who had a really, really darn nice season. He led the American League in at-bats, plate appearances, and games with 161 of those. The only game that he sat out was the one get-right game against Boston, where everything kind of felt like it started going a little bit better from there. The results weren't immediate, but you could kind of see the trends spiraling in that direction. Wins were kind of changing a little before then. They had kind of figured out whatever was going wrong with them, but he was also 6th in triples with his, I believe, 5 triples on the season. He was leading the league, tied with, I believe, Alex Bregman in sac flies with 10 of those, and he was 5th in steals, setting a new career high with 25 stolen bases, a member of the 25-25 club with those 26 bombs and 25 stolen bases. Now, his OPS relative to the league, not quite as good as it was in around, I want to say beginning of August, before that August slump started to take its toll. End of the year with a 733 OPS, which is just 8% better than the average second baseman. So he was better than the average one, but still not super great. But he is a lot better than the Rangers have had at second base in a long, long time. He had the highest OPS from any Ranger second baseman since Rougned Odor in 2018, and the first 5+ baseball reference war from any Ranger second baseman since Ian Kinsler back in his last season with Texas in 2013. Now, we're going to get into the bad, those awful 2 months, and a little later look at what it means for the future and an overall takeaway on this season. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. You can make some bets on this Phillies and Braves series. I'm pretty sure that the Braves were definitely favored to win the series, but right now the Phillies are up 6-1 in the bottom of the 4th inning. If you want to go place a bet on the Mariners to win their series against the Astros because you just don't like the Astros and want another reason to cheer for the Mariners, then you can go ahead and do that at betonline.net, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, let's get into the bad of the season. I waited a long time, gave him a big grace period to finally do an in-depth podcast about how badly Marcus Semien was doing. I waited about 2 months, and then not much after I made that podcast, he hit his first home run, and everything kind of spiraled upward from there. But those first 2 months of the season were incredibly rough. And, he's had a history of not being a great starter. There's a reason why he has only made one All-Star selection. Even that year in 2019, where he finished third in MVP voting, he was not an All-Star that year because he didn't have a great first half. In his career in April and March, he has a 702 OPS, which is by far the lowest of any month, 49 points lower than literally any other month in the season for his career. Now, this year it probably dragged those numbers down even further. In April and March, he had 21 games, and it was awful. He hit 157, on base of 226, and slugged even lower than that on base at 217. It was awful. He had 5 extra base hits that were all doubles, 18 strikeouts to just 8 walks. It was just everything was going wrong for him, offensively, defensively. Like things were not great for Marcus Semien at all. I mean, his BABIP was low. He was not hitting balls hard. It wasn't like he was even getting that unlucky. He was just bad. I mean, he was in a new situation. He was maybe one of the 2 guys that were looked to maybe be the face of the franchise, but he is not a vocal leader. So that is not really his style to step up and be that guy. And I've talked about it a lot all season, but really this is a completely new situation for him. A guy who has been a perennial underdog. He was a guy who was drafted by the White Sox and then traded to Oakland, where, for years and years and years, everyone talked about, oh, well, this guy can't play shortstop. So, he just sucks, and was completely overlooked, and was overlooked again, even by his own team, by Oakland, where he grew up in the Bay and went to Cal and should have, by all means, been a hometown hero, a guy who they tried to keep at all costs, especially coming off of that 2019 season and trying to extend him. I mean, 2020 wasn't great for him, so he took that 1-year bet on himself deal in 2021 with the Blue Jays and completely broke out there and had a fantastic season and, earned himself this big contract. And then he comes in with all these expectations, and it just did not work out for him in those first 2 months. I mean, last year, all this, his other baseball savant numbers were way higher. The barrel percentage, WOBA, all those expected numbers, average, exit velo, literally everything was at least in the red, except for the expected batting average. That wasn't super high. And the arm strength, which I'm kind of curious how they factor that in, because I'm pretty sure his arm is not, last year wasn't in the 16th percentile, and this year it is a little bit lower, 15th percentile, which I think part of that is just it's measuring the throws on the field as opposed to the max. I think it's the average, and so he's not having to make a whole lot of very hard throws because he's in second base and there's not a whole lot of range to go. But I digress. This was an incredibly miserable start to the season for him in this new place, trying to find a new routine, which, granted, he did that in Toronto pretty quickly, but he was not expected to be the savior, the turnaround guy. I mean, the Blue Jays were already kind of on the upswing. You could see a little bit of it with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. that year before in 2020 and 2019. He was a very highly touted prospect. They had a lot of other guys that were highly touted youngsters. He was kind of the adult in the room to just be like, all right, I'm going to come alongside y'all and kind of bring everybody up. But he was by no means the guy. Even that year that he had, that was a career year, was one of the best years that any primary second baseman has had in maybe the history of Major League Baseball. That's the kind of stuff he was coming off of. And it's like, all right, well, you're coming to this new team, you're paid a whole lot of money, and here's this completely new place, and you're the guy. I mean, Corey Seager's there, and he's gonna be really quiet, but you're the veteran guy who has done things. I mean, Corey Seager has won too, but you're a little bit older than him, so there's gonna be a little bit more expectation on you. And it just did not sit right with him. It just did not. It took him a while to get there. He got there eventually, but it was rough. And it'd be nice to say, oh, well, I will often be like, well, if you throw out those first 2 months of the season, the numbers are so great. And, well, you can't really do that. Those numbers happened. Those months happened. And a lot of these really, really great numbers he was putting up while the Rangers were losing. The Rangers were not, it's not his fault that his numbers weren't, or that the Rangers were losing around those great numbers. I mean, May was the only time that this team was 500. It just did not get there. And as soon as he started, on his upswing, everybody else started kind of going on the downswing. Things started going not as great. And looking at how well these different players did, like Seager had that incredible month of the end of June and early July to get into the All-Star break, and Semien absolutely crushed it in June. Same with Nathaniel Lowe, and Adolis Garcia too had a pretty decent month of June. I can't really figure out how this team kept losing so many games in the month of June in a schedule that was, to be honest, pretty winnable. But that's a story and a discussion for a different day. But this was rough. The on base is not quite what you would want for a leadoff hitter. I think he was eventually pretty well suited to that as when he was leading off the games this year. He had an on base of 328, which is a little bit lower than when he was leading off the inning in general of a 339. When he was batting first, he had an OPS much higher than anywhere else. When he was batting second, a lot of the time in that early slump, so I think these numbers might be indicative of that. But when he was batting second in 40 games this year, he had an OPS under literally 1 point under 600. When he was batting in first, leading off, he had a 363 OPS and a 314 on base. Now, that's fine, but one of the things that Marcus Semien, he does a lot of things well, but the on base has not been super great throughout his career. For his career in 10 years, he's got a 321 on base percentage. He had a really, really sky high OBP in that 2019 season of 369. Even in 2021 last year, when he was having that breakout season, the OPS was really, really high, in large part due to those 45 home runs and 39 doubles. He did not walk at nearly the same rate as he did in 2019. He had a 334 on base, which, like, he seems to thrive in that leadoff role, and I like him hitting ahead of Corey Seager. Ideally, there would be a guy with kind of his skill set, just walk like a little bit more. I mean, he didn't walk at an elite rate this year, 39th percentile, which is not really what you want from your leadoff on base, get on base, and go do stuff. You do like having that little extra cherry on top of a leadoff hitter who can get you some leadoff bombs and can hit some extra base hits and get in scoring position by stealing bases. But still, I think next year, if he's going to stay the leadoff hitter, I would like that on base to be just a little bit higher. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get my overall takeaways on this season, compare the expectations to what I had preseason, and what it all means for next year. But first, this word from our sponsors. Now, I had some really lofty goals for Marcus Semien before the season, like just really, really lofty. And he did not live up to them. I set the expectations real high, and they just were not quite what I envisioned them. I envisioned a lot of career highs, a lot of career best of all the other things, and matching kind of close to what he did last year, but he just wasn't there. I envisioned a career high of OPS over 900, which he has never done. Even in 2019, I think 891 was his OPS that year. Last year, when he was having that great season, his OPS was 873. Again, that on base is the main reason that wasn't over the 900 mark. I think I predicted 41 home runs, and yeah, not quite there. On base in the high 350s. Again, all of that not quite there. But I do think that was something that wasn't out of the realm of possibilities, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on him next year because he signed a 7-year deal, and when you sign those deals that are more than 5 years, especially on a guy who is just coming off his age 30 season, this is age 31 season, that's generally where you start to see the decline. I don't think we're going to see that sharp of a decline in him next year. By the way, he just turned 32 on September 7th. Because he does such a good job of taking care of his body and being just so ridiculously detail-oriented and routine-oriented in terms of how he keeps himself up. But still, eventually that decline is going to come. And I think next year there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. And next year and the year after that, because there's a lot of pressure to make the postseason literally next year, or maybe Chris Young or whoever the heck they hire as manager this offseason is going to, they might lose their jobs if the Rangers don't make the playoffs next year, which, again, is a big ask. There's going to have to be a lot more changes in the offseason, and not all that's going to come down to Marcus Semien, but a big portion of it is with him and Seager and Lowe in the offense. Like a large portion of it is going to come down to how well those guys do. Obviously, this was a down season for Semien. This is not what he expected. He pulled it out nicely in the second half. Overall, it's not horrible. But it's not what he wanted. It's not what the Rangers wanted, and it's not what I think the fans wanted and expected from him. I was almost more excited about the Semien aspect of this than the Seager. The Seager, it just getting Seager didn't even feel real. Like it honestly, none of that happening in the week or days leading up to the lockout felt real. Like it was just all kind of a dream, because the pipe dream was like, well, maybe the Rangers can get their one pitcher. You know, they probably need several. They didn't. They got two, and they probably needed at least two more. But they got Gray, who was the guy who I really wanted, kind of mid range. And then, you know, all right, you're gonna get one of those big shortstops, and if you can throw some crazy money, if you can also pair a Marcus Semien with those guys and upgrade both the middle infield spots, because there's not a whole lot of prospects that are like right there, ready to play second base. I didn't realize how close Ezekiel Duran would be, but like there's not somebody else there, and second base really needs to be upgraded from where it's been the past 3, 4, 5 years. And they did that, and I was like, oh my gosh, like the Semien guy, no one was willing to go the years that the Rangers were, but he has been one of the better players in baseball, top 10 player in baseball for the last 3 years heading into this offseason when the Rangers signed him. And it's like, yeah, if you can go get him, then you go freaking get him. And then you pair a Seager on top of it. Even before I knew what Lowe was going to do this year, I thought, okay, well, that takes one of the worst offenses in baseball and makes it at least to the level of competent. But, I mean, those first 2 months were so horrendous. And maybe if he was just like a little bit better, and everyone was just a little bit better all season, this season was so much of what if and almost and, could have had it, is that just leaves fans and everyone around it just so frustrated. I think that's the worst part, is you could see it. You could see the improvement from night to night. It wasn't just like they finished with one of the worst records in baseball, but it's not like every single game was like, all right, Rangers are getting whooped. Nobody can hit. Nobody can pitch. Everything sucks and is poo-poo, and everything needs to get way, way better next year. It's like, okay, well, there's a Marcus Semien there. There's a Corey Seager. There is an offense that is at least competent, at least middle of the pack, could maybe use a little bit of adjustment, some better numbers from those two big money stars in Semien and Seager next year. And this offense goes from okay to pretty darn good, especially if Nathaniel Lowe can take another step next year. And we saw him have a prolonged, excellent stretch, just like Semien, from both of them from June throughout the end of the season. It was a little rough in like the final 2 weeks, but for the most part, Semien showed what he was there for. He did, for the most part, what he was there for. It's just those first 2 months really started it off on a sour note, and I think getting past that, but still not forgetting it, forgiving, not forgetting, is kind of a more spiteful way to put this than I would like, but I can't think of a better term for it. I do think just having that comfort level, having the routines, having the, just a level of familiarity with the organization that he found that helped him find his, routine that helped him succeed throughout the back half of the season will really help get off to a better start. I don't think that he's going to come out of the gates, guns a-blazing, have like a 900 OPS in the first month. That would be really great. I would love that. Maybe he could actually make an all-star game next year, because I think he was one of the best 2-3 second basemen in the American League this year, and if the all-star game happened at the end of the year, I think he might be getting a call. But that is a neither here nor there situation. But I think next year the expectations are going to be higher. He's got to be better. He's got to be closer to 2021 Marcus Semien than he was 2020 or 2022. Like, there were some moments, and it wasn't all terrible, but the level of consistency that is expected with a guy of his standing, of his caliber, of his track record is going to be higher. And you're going to have to get that to get into the playoffs next year. They're going to have to get more from all of those big money guys, but especially from Semien. I really liked what I saw from him down the stretch, like what he brings to the Rangers as a player, as a leadoff hitter. But this year was just not it. It was not it for him. He'll be the first one to tell you that. Rangers will also tell you that, and fans will also let you know. And I'm glad that he's here. It's definitely an improvement, and having stars is always a nice thing. But I think next year, crossing over that 30 home run mark in OPS, I think it has to be at least above 800. I know this was a down year for offense in general and what have you, but like the best hitters got through it and got past it. I mean, he's not Aaron Judge, and that's fine. But some of the best hitters in baseball, they were able to overcome these things. I think Seager was also one of those guys off to a rough first month and a half or whatever until they fixed baseball. It's easy to forget those things, but no, the baseball was extremely dead those first 2 months. Which, by the way, not to give Yankees more flowers than they deserve, but it kind of makes that 62 home run season a little more crazy. But anyway, hopefully next year they can use the same baseball they've been using for the second half this year and can start off on a better note, and the Rangers can actually take advantage and get some wins when Marcus Semien is on his hot streaks, because when he's hot, we've seen he can be one of the best players, if not the best player, in all of Major League Baseball for at least a week or a month or a prolonged stretch for sure. And even though he's not living up to his contract this year, I do think that is still money very much well spent, still a significant upgrade from what the Rangers have had basically since Ian Kinsler was here. And having a 5.7 WAR second baseman is not something that happens a whole lot. So even with the overall down offensive numbers, still, the guy, for the most part, did his job. But still, I would have liked to see the Rangers in the playoffs. It's all right. They'll get there eventually. That is my season overview for Marcus Semien. On tomorrow's show, I'm going to be doing a season review of Corey Seager, who, again, had some maybe even higher highs than Marcus Semien and some pretty low lows as well. Still, last offseason was a lot of fun. Hopefully the Rangers can do something maybe not quite as dramatic this offseason, but still, I think there's going to be at least one eye-opening contract thrown out to somebody who is not just Martin Perez, and I'm very much looking forward to that whenever it should happen. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Rangers. For your next listen, go check out Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully. He's recapping everything that's going on in the Major League Baseball playoffs with some commentary from our hosts around the network who are lucky enough to have their teams in the playoffs. That's going to do it for this show, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.